Homeschoolers of Reddit. What is your best culture shock moment? Story 1 for me, it was dissent, just the concept that you were allowed to disagree with something. For me, everything was presented in a black and white, a good or evil. When I got to college, everything was a sea of gray. Edit, I get it. There are 50 shades of gray. You aren't being original. Stop. Story 2, not really a culture shock, but finding out the truth about so many things my mother told me growing up. The heat you feel when you rub your hands together, are atoms being split. I don't think you realize what splitting an atom does. Mother, edit, glad my top comment. Makes me sound like I was raised to be a moron. I'm in college now, in a STEM field with a fairly high GPA. Just want to clarify that. Story 3, a girl who was recovering from cancer joined my high school class in 11th grade. She had never been to a real school before. She had been hospitalized from a very young age, 6 or 8. We really felt bad for her and took her in as best we could, as we were a small class full of very nice people. Within the first day at our school, it was apparent she had the social maturity of an 8-year-old. She wasn't mentally handicapped. She had just never interacted with people before other than her parents. Now, the culture shock part, she was super spoiled by her parents. So when she came to school, she treated us like she treated her parents. At lunch, if she saw something she liked that someone had packed in their lunch, she simply demanded it out of fear or pity. Most kids just gave it to her. We talked among ourselves and decided that we needed to just say no, as it was just making the situation worse by spoiling her more. So at lunch, we started saying, no, you cannot have my food. I brought this, and if I give it to you, I will not have anything to eat. The first time someone said this, she just stood there in shock. She looked like it was the first time someone ever told her no. She instantly freaked out and started screaming and crying. She had to be picked up by her parents. This wasn't the only incident, just the most memorable. This was many years ago, but last I heard she was going to do some social skills rehabilitation or something to get her ready to be around other people her age before going back to a school. Her parents agreed with us that it wasn't our job as classmates to try to correct her behavior. Edit, a lot of people have commented on how well we handled the situation. I suppose it's relevant that I went to a very small non-religious private school. We were a friendly but tight-knit group 36 in my graduating class. I don't think this would have happened in a big school. She would have probably just been bullied and ignored. More about my school. Story 4, go to lunch on my first day of middle school 7th grade. Went at the wrong time, ate alone, returned to an empty homeroom. Then I cried in the front office. Story 5, the day I wore a pink cheetah print sweatsuit, all white sneakers, and a High School Musical t-shirt to school, and didn't understand why people were laughing. I had no concept of cool clothes or even socially acceptable clothes. I was homeschooled from 3rd through 6th grade and had just moved cross-country from a very small town. I was 13 when this happened. I also didn't know how to open a locker. I'm still a bit odd, but a lot better adjusted. Edit, it was hard to tell back then, but I'm a girl. I wore a lot of pink to make myself seem more feminine. I don't have any pictures from the day I wore this outfit, but most of the pieces were given to my sister, so we'll see if I can find it. Story 6, I was surprised by the fact that guys and girls talk to each other a lot, just as friends. My parents were, and still are, the type of people who believe that all guys want is, and all girls want is protection. So, I was always nervous around guys in general before realizing that it was bullshit, and that I wasn't a freak for wanting. I still get anxious when talking about crushes because it was never something I did as a younger kid. Also, dances are confusing as, edit, yes, I get guys want, but so do girls. And I was taught to feign disinterest no matter what, because it's evil, and for Satanist devil worshippers insert bad thing here. Also, I forgot to mention that before I started school in 5th grade, I wore only solid colored velour tracksuits. Story 7, short shorts. Growing up, every girl I met wore knee-length shorts, and I thought the super short ones were just something in movies. First day of high school, I learned I was wrong. Story 8, I was homeschooled my whole life. I literally have no idea what the inside of an elementary, middle, or high school looks like. I'm 22 and in college now, but I can't really say there were any real culture shocks. I had normal friends because I was always in some kind of sport club activity with them, as well as other homeschoolers. There's a lot of misconception and misinformation about homeschooled kids. People always assume I'm a religious, sheltered, socially awkward person because of it, but I'm not. Just an average girl who started working a shitty job at a movie theater when I was 17 like all the other kids. I may not have a ton of friends because of it, but I love the ones I do have, and I think I'm better off because of it. Edit, I forgot to add that my parents chose to homeschool my siblings and I because they aren't fans of the American school system and didn't want our education to rely on an underpaid and overstressed teacher. I learned a lot about myself in terms of what my passions and goals are and got an awesome jump start on them due to the extra time I had in my day. There's definitely a right way and a wrong way to do it. Story 9, okay, great, I've been waiting for this one for a long time. So, I was homeschooled all the way through middle school, and my mother was a super fundamentalist Christian, conservative, crazy person and told me my entire life about the liberal gay agenda trying to destroy God's word, the church, and turn me gay. Then I started going to high school halfway through freshman year. I was so worried about all of the godless and worldly kids that were going to try and turn me away from my good Christian upbringing, but I bravely gathered my stuff and went to my first day of public school. Unbeknownst to me, it was Spirit Week, and not only Spirit Week, but Sadie Hawkins Day. In our school, this was a day where all of the students were allowed to dress up in costumes of the opposite genders, essentially cross-dressing. So here I am, a little scared homeschooling Christian spelling bee champion, walking around in this scary Alabama high school full of gender benders, cross-dressers, transsexuals, and homosexuals trying to indoctrinate me. All the girls were in baggy jeans and shades or top hats and fake mustaches, while the boys were all dressed as ballerinas or certain pop stars with wigs and TP. And of course they were all with me. It was terrifying. Then I got back up the next day and stalwartly put on my armor of Christ or of truth, shield of righteousness, helmet of salvation, ECT, LOL, and found the strength to prepare myself for this worldly assault on my principles. Then I got there, and everyone was dressed like a celebrity, and someone had the decency to tell me what Spirit Week was. Hilarious looking back on it, but I did have a rattling culture shock. Story 10, I'm a 29-year-old guy from California. I went to 3 different public schools from kindergarten through 4th grade. Then I was pulled out and homeschooled. My parents were hardcore Christian fundamentalists, and we knew lots of very legalistic homeschooling families. My days consisted of my molester mom either waking me up by storming into my room in a rage about why I wasn't up already, or she'd crawl onto the bed and try to spoon with me, which would repulse the living out of me and make me kick her. Family Bible study every morning after breakfast. Homeschooling, which consisted of me sitting at a desk with a stack of books and sheet of paper with assignments my mom had written down. I basically taught myself. My mom was there to correct me and rage at me. I'd beg her to change a math textbook because I couldn't understand it, and she'd ignore me, saying it was challenging me. Some days we'd do homeless ministry with one of the churches we attended Christian speak for community service. 3-4-ish my rural neighborhood friends would be getting home from school, and I'd try to find a way to go hang out with them, even though they kind of didn't want me around. 6 p.m. dinner be here, or be raged at beaten. Church youth group Awana's Christian Boy-Girl Scout sort-off Lord's house, cleaning toilets and bathrooms at a men's-only halfway house run by a church we attended, family Bible study, in bed, in other words, a Jesus camp kid kind of life. Honestly, it was humiliating, and I thought of suicide a lot. If it weren't for my younger brother's idea, have killed myself. Everyone, even adults, put it down and said I wouldn't learn as much and I wouldn't have friends. As soon as a kid I was meeting found out I was homeschooled. This is in 1994 to 2001. It was instant zero respect. I had no control of my life, no friends, and it was totally impossible to be cool or keep up with other kids. I was a pariah. Kids in the neighborhood ridiculed me till I bawled and didn't care that I was bawling. I just had to get used to it, and eventually they got tired of it, and I was borderline accepted. Rebelling against my parents was downright unsafe. I was disciplined by being hit with a stick. My dad would tell jokes as he was doing it. My dad would tease me about the fact I'd have to talk to a therapist in the future because of what he was doing to me. Once he taunted me to call CPS, saying, "Go ahead, they'll either believe me or they'll put you in a foster home." I was afraid that I'd be made fun until I killed myself if I went to a public university, so I went to Biola University. To get into Biola, you have to submit a 3-page paper explaining how you became a Christian and sign a contract swearing that you won't drink, smoke, do drugs, gamble, have premarital, and that you were not gay. I thought I'd be surrounded by kids like me, but it was full of fake, uptight, pious dummies from youth group. I was ridiculed and disrespected and a pariah, but I was also regarded with disappointment. Christians are very conscientious about being cool, and homeschool kids are usually the exact opposite. So we're like a blight on the aspiring, cool kid Christian community. People were disappointed to meet me. Biola Talbot is where William Lane Craig teaches. I was studying philosophy and biblical studies there. They have a kind of assembly line where they take philosophy majors from Biola and feed them into Talbot, the graduate program, and get the master's in philosophy. Then you go get your PhD somewhere, and then you get a job teaching philosophy at a university, and now we have a Christian fundamentalist philosophy professor at a public university. That's the path I was on, but I flunked out due to relentless social anxiety, depression, loneliness, and disillusionment with the Christian community. I had been raised in a strange way that alienated and isolated me from my peers so that I could be an evangelist for a religious community that doesn't accept me. FML. Sometimes I have bouts of shame so intense I go into a catatonic state and feel unworthy of opening my eyes or looking people in the face. WEM in therapy. I'm fairly smart because I wanted to be all along and secretly knew from watching other so-called smart people that smart people just know things we don't. That's it. You could just watch college lectures on YouTube, read books, listen to them on tape, and you can be smarter than any on a campus, but I'm up social-wise to some degree. I struggle with the belief that I'll be forever unworthy and looked down upon for not being a normal person and growing up the way everyone else did, for not having friends, parties, relationships, sports, all the stereotypical American kid, and from a foreign country. Since I was hanging out with non-Christian kids and doing homeless ministry and halfway house ministry, there was nothing to really shock me. My family was always okay with violence because of how violent the Bible is, but no. I could see a movie where a man gets his head cut off, but not a movie that had a naked breast. The most shocking thing was going to a Christian university, a totally Christian environment filled with Christians, and finding out how superficial and ridiculous Christians were, how utterly unlike Christ they were, actually is still pretty shocking. I feel so intolerably ashamed of not having girlfriends and experiences like everyone else. I can't stand that I missed out on so much life, and I feel like no one will ever take me seriously because of it. One other thing, I always have to say not all homeschool people are like this, but to be honest, I never met any normal homeschool people. They're all weird, and they're all indoctrinated to deny it. Homeschooling is a weird Christian reconstructionist project started by a guy named R.J. Rushdoony. Once in a blue moon, there's the non-religious PhD parent who homeschooled their kid into med school by 16 or something, but to be honest, I've never met one of those. I have met homeschool kids who never learned to read, though. TLDR, not all homeschooling is like this, but I was homeschooled in an abusive religious home that made me want to kill myself. Homeschooling is something I'm deeply ashamed of, and that shame has stopped me from making friends and having relationships. No culture shock, though. Story 11, my friend was homeschooled until she was 9, and since her mom wasn't exactly a teacher or saying she didn't learn to read until she was 10, she still doesn't understand basic social etiquette like how to eat like a human and when to shut up or how to control her emotions. She's 18 now, and she somehow doesn't hate her mother. It might be Stockholm Syndrome. Story 12, I went to public school for kindergarten and 9-12th grade. Besides that, I was heavily isolated by whack job parents, not even allowed to go outside to the fenced yard. Yep, internet and TV were my teachers. I actually liked learning because I had no pressure to do so until high school. I was plunged into public school because my father was sure that I needed to graduate from a HS instead of homeschool. Many things shocked me, not just about school, but about people in general, as I've been practically under house arrest for so long. I had no idea you couldn't copy and paste from multiple sources and put it together in an essay. Big fat embarrassing F on that one. In front of the class, biggest failure due to homeschool was that I thought I had to write down literally every word the teacher said during a lecture. So I completely stressed myself out trying to write insanely fast and get everything down in my notes. I did horribly in my classes until I learned from others how to take notes, because during the whole class period, I was just busily writing down everything, not learning the material edit well. Thanks, guys. I didn't know note-taking like a maniac was a problem for others, too. Great tips. Story 13, I grew up in an extreme religious conservative school, homeschooled for a year, and then jumped into public high school in 10th grade. I was also a couple of years ahead, so I was only 13 at the time. Third day of school, the guy sitting across from me in biology says, I've been with 100 chicks, and baby, you gonna be number 101. Edit for all the questions. No, I did not become 101. And since I was the first guy to ever hit on me, I spent the next several years unable to recognize the social cues that meant someone was interested in me. Story 14, I was homeschooled for a few years and never even heard of fire drill before. Then I went to public school and had a fire drill with no prior warning. Literally thinking in my little school kid head, taking in all this new social stimuli, and freaking out that there's going to be a giant drill made of fire that will come boring down at any moment. I don't think it's exactly culture shock, but thought it was worth sharing. Story 15, I was homeschooled all the way until sophomore year of high school. That year was fraught with culture shocks, but one stands out in my mind. It was my favorite class. I had always been competitive, and my years doing sports practically full-time as a homeschooler prepared me well, and I quickly rose to the top of the class. I excelled at all things, understanding the ins and outs of all the various sports we played, gradually shaving precious seconds off my mile times and whatnot. I was an unstoppable god, until the swim unit. Don't get me wrong, swim went well too, but afterwards, we were all told to hit the showers. I got out the pool, pleased with myself for the longest time, spent treading water and the fastest laps. I pridefully swaggered off to the boys' locker room, stripped off my suit, hung in the locker, grabbed my toiletries, and confidently strode toward the showers only to find that I was the only one naked. It was like something out of a nightmare. TLDR, told to hit the showers after the swim unit. I erroneously assumed I was supposed to shower naked. Edit, I remembered another. Up until high school, I thought all drug users were hardened criminals who were always on the lam, and that drugs were very difficult to procure. My naivety did not last long. Story 16, how little actual learning mattered. I was homeschooled almost my entire school career aside from kindergarten, 3rd grade and 4th grade, but in high school, I took some electives and actual campus. Literally no one gave about their studies. I had always paid extremely close attention to what I was learning and figured that was sort of the point. I had no idea there was such a huge emphasis on socializing. I'd come to class, and people want to hang out. I was like, what the for? I'm not here for fun. I'm here to get this class over with. Now that I'm older, I can kind of see how I missed out on some of the more fun school stuff. On the other hand, I didn't have to deal with. So there's that. Story 17, one of my best friends always tells me that the first day he went to school, everyone stood up and sang the national anthem. He proceeded to move his lips and think to himself, are we in a cult or something? Story 18, I was homeschooled until I started college. And honestly, I never experienced any form of culture shock. I was kind of surprised by how some students would talk to profs who were just trying their best to teach a herd of grumpy freshmen. But other than that, everything was business as usual. I know a lot of people don't believe this, but a lot of homeschooled kids share the same experiences as those who went to formal schools. Edit, yes, social skills. No, homeschooling did not leave me a social cripple. Yes, I'm a normally functioning person. Story 19, so many people smoke weed. Before I got my first job, I always assumed it was just something big criminals did. That's just how it seemed. Since then, 3 years ago now, I've realized everyone I work with does, and that's okay. Story 20, I wasn't homeschooled, but I was born in a small town and went to a private, very religious school for 10 years. Then I took a trip to San Francisco that fell on the weekend of the LGBT Pride Fest, and the first shop I set foot in sold vibrators exclusively. Needless to say, I live in San Francisco now. Story 21. I wish I had been up at 3 in the morning, so I would not have been late. I was shocked to find that people who weren't Christians were actually really nice. My parents always said things like, don't let the world corrupt you, because they're all doing drugs, having, and swearing. It surprised me when I found a group of people that still are the most loving and accepting friends I have ever had in my life. My church friends were always very judgmental, and if you even thought an immortal thought, they wouldn't talk to you. I'm no longer a Christian today. Because of them. Not because they led me down the wrong path, but because they show me more love than the church or God or my patents ever did. Oh my goodness, the first thing I learned at public school was why so many babies are born in November. Shortly after, I learned what it was. Then I learned a bunch of misconceptions that public schoolers have about homeschoolers, and eventually learned from my own experience that homeschoolers have a lot of misconceptions about public schoolers. Edit, I grammar bad. Edit, too good grief. Apparently, homeschooling doesn't have as much to do with not knowing about the November baby thing as I thought. I was unprepared for a lot of the high school social bullshit. Didn't have any idea that bullies and cliques were a thing. Once I got to college, though, nothing really shocked me. I mean, I had friends my own age. We watched TV. I did a fair amount of extracurriculars, and my sister was into sports. Nothing was really all that shocking. Story 22, too late. This will be stay buried. Edit, thank you for reading down to this. I love you guys. The edit too. Wow. I feel a lot less alien. Knowing you guys also fight this instinct, I want to add that my ideas of authority figures really came a lot from books I read. I gorged on books and LeVar Burton and Mr. Rogers. I thought they were the rule. Still a shock that teacher or other authority figures could possibly not be right. So many times this has burned me. I was barricaded from the world. So no television, no radio, not even allowed to play with neighborhood kids. That was until I was 11, parents divorced. Now, 21 years later, I still can't absorb that people with authority could be wrong or malicious does not compute. Story 23, a friend of my sister's, is an unbelievably sheltered, very homeschooled, extremely fundamentalist Christian in Sydney. One day, my sister and her friend were making jokes and talking, and one said, "You're so dirty slutty-ick. I bet you shower naked," to my sister. She laughed, and they all started making the same joke to each other. Eventually, this poor sheltered lass had to put her hand up and say, "Why is this funny?" She showered in a swimming costume, as did her whole family. Because nakedness is immoral, they asked how she cleaned herself. She got extremely embarrassed and refused to explain further, because that would require talking about bare skin. This poor little dear, I want to hug the out of her. She's also never read fantasy novels, because they imply that magic isn't a tool of the devil. She also has no idea what her vagina is for. She's 16. As in, she literally doesn't understand how reproduction or periods work, because whenever she tries to ask her parents tell her off for immorality, I'm going to have to give that girl a "Where Do Babies Come From" book soon. My sister was the one who explained why girls need pads and why her panties were always ruined at the end of the month. Story 24, I homeschooled from 2nd to 11th. I went to the community college at 17 because I had a ton of high school level courses, mostly math, to catch up on. I wouldn't say there was a culture shock, I just didn't do great at first. Dealing with professors was something I caught on to pretty quick, and the classmates were about what I expected since I did have friends. The major issues having a real education brought up were in the realm of science. The stuff I had at home was hardline creationist material, so it was pretty different being in an environment where the conclusion wasn't given before we started looking. I was also very far set behind. I learned high school math from review classes, which were very fast-paced since they assumed we just didn't do well when we saw it before. At the community college, my GPA was bad, so I ended up at a pretty bad school for about 2 years. I eventually dropped out of the bad school with a 3.8. I dropped because the program went back to the community college and retook courses to get a 4.0, then got into a really good engineering school. Had I been given a decent high school education, I would almost certainly have avoided that 3-year delay and ended up where I am now a lot earlier. It clarified my GPA being bad at the community college. Story 25, homeschooled from kindergarten through 12th grade. So bona fide homeschooler here. To be honest, the only thing that I was fairly behind in wasn't anything or related, like embarrassingly so, to the point where I asked my adult cousin if she gave birth through her belly button when I was 14. Ouch. Fortunately, I eventually discovered Urban Dictionary, and my embarrassing questions ceased. In my defense, it wasn't entirely related to me being homeschooled, but more so to the fact that I was just an incredibly innocent individual, and when my friend would make a reference that went over my head, instead of helping me out a little, would simply smile and say, "You're so innocent, you wouldn't get it. Thanks, that's really it though." I had lots of friends and participated in sports and school events through the private school my homeschool group was a part of. To this day, when I mention that I was homeschooled, I get lots of shocked looks and exclamations of, "But you don't act homeschooled." Well, I have friends that are more innocent than me that went to public schools. So I think it is safe to say you really can't judge a person based purely on how they were educated. Story 26, my biggest culture shock was how easy public school can be if you study. I had thought that I was going to come out of home schooling and struggle through my middle school and high school years, miles behind the other kids. Turns out the other kids just cared about relationships. Story 27, I grew up being homeschooled. My parents were insane Christian, right-wing, overprotective, sheltering nutjobs. I never went to a public school in my life. Now, I'm not saying that my mom sucked at teaching, but okay, yes, she did. She would give me a stack of books and be like, "Learn." Okay, it wasn't quite like that, but close. I learned absolutely nothing about school from my parents, and even less about life. When I was around 15, I started hanging out with people behind my parents' backs. Yes, they were crazy enough to try to control who I made friends with. Anyway, I always felt left out and different because for the longest time, I just couldn't even function in social settings. I would just find a corner to be alone. Cue loneliness and depression. I started cutting and tried to kill myself a couple times. At 16, my parents ditched me and moved out of the country. I got a GED, and 2 years later, I'm still homeless. But in moving up, I'm a waiter and actually able to make conversation and act normal. Sorry for this being so long. But if you've actually read this all, then thanks. And please, parents, future parents, don't do this to your kids. You may think you're helping them, but you couldn't be more wrong. Edit, sorry for not exactly answering the question. I just felt like this should be shared. Another edit, the cutting and suicide attempts weren't because of my parents' actions directly, but from untreated clinical depression, bipolar disorder. Story 28, chicks, man, I was homeschooled until 10th grade. Not crazy parents, and had plenty of social activity, but not going to school all day with females seriously stunted my ability to understand them, because those formative years are very important for that sort of thing. Other than that, I turned out fine. Graduated 3rd in my high school class, went to college, got a pretty good job, but still no romantic luck. Story 29, I had a friend in high school who was homeschooled for religious reasons until she entered high school. She quickly got over the culture shock by everything that moved. Story 30, from my school, there is a small Catholic private school across the street. My school is class sizes 30 to 50. They have 5. They may as well be homeschooled. The Catholic school only goes to 8th grade. Freshman year, they come over. Now picture a bunch of unknowing kids learning about all this and drugs, and that's normal for the first time. The difference crossing the street is huge. I wonder what it's like. Story 31, I'm not going to diss on homeschooling, because I know a lot of people who came out normal from it. However, my neighbor is homeschooling her kid, and he is turning 10 and 25. He is a big fan of video games. One day, he came over and saw my games and was very happy. I caught him staring down my Zelda games for about 5 minutes and asked him if he had a Wii or 3DS or Wii U. He nodded and told me he did have a Wii with like 3 games, which I later found out were learning games. I told him he could take Twilight Princess and play it as much as he liked. He started calling me his best friend. I later found out the kid didn't have many friends because he was almost 247 at home. One night his dad comes over with him and the game at hand. He says thank you and hands over the game. I told him he could keep it. The kid was jumping happy. He told me I was the coolest person he knew, and that was a cute gesture, but it was sad cause this kid had no friends. TLDR, my neighbor's kid is homeschooled and didn't get out much, therefore didn't have any friends. We bonded over video games. Edit 1, whoever gilded this, thank you. Didn't know what to do with it though. Story 32. I was homeschooled from the 5th grade on. I also went to a homeschool group for my entire school career. Besides some kids being insanely sheltered, most everyone was the same as everyone else who went to public schools. We just spent 1 day a week getting our schoolwork and learning a few things in classes. It wasn't so bad overall, and I still have friends from there. Sometimes I wonder what public school would have been like, but oh well. Story 33. Homeschooled all my life. No great stories to tell from my end. I'm just happy this topic exists. My mom was a huge networker, so I had a ton of interaction with other homeschoolers. There are basically 3 types of kids who are homeschooled: too smart, too dumb, and too sheltered, usually religious parents. Some of the sharpest minds I've met were homeschoolers, and some of the most appalling helicopter parenting too. A lot of homeschool groups like to get together and make pseudo-schools. I avoided that like the plague. Hey, AC a Black Panther. The homeschool prom is in 2 months. Are you planning on going? Who in their right mind imagined that was a good idea? I have no clue. Or the fake graduation ceremony with fake certificates. I stayed at home and watched ESPN that day. Story 34. My ex was homeschooled up until high school. She said the biggest difference was the rigidness of the structure when she was homeschooled. If they came up on an interesting tangent, they'd pause the class and explore it. For example, between the end of the American Revolution in 1783 and the beginning of George Washington's presidency in 1789, who governed America, what exactly was happening inside the chrysalis while the caterpillar is changing into a butterfly? If there's a quadratic formula, is there a cubic formula, a quartic formula, a quintic formula? Also, when they got bored or tired and wanted to change of pace, they could switch to another subject. Can't to that in regular school. Story 35. It was a super sin that promised hellfire and brimstone. Went to my first party in college under duress from my best friend who knew I needed it and walked in on a couple in the laundry room. I just stood there shocked, then walked to the backyard and peed in the pool because it was my first time drunk as well. A month later, I ended up losing my virginity to a woman 6 years my senior and started what amounted to addiction. Be careful what you make taboo for kids. Not being able to cope with that stuff maturely can really haunt you later. I was homeschooled with my brother from 2nd grade until about high school. I began my freshman year as a 12 years old because we were gifted students in rural Virginia. Both my parents did an amazing job providing my brother and I with a great education, and now he and I are doing great socially. And academically, my parents kept me and my brother involved in sports and other clubs, so there were no huge issues with same-age social interaction. Sarcasm, did not understand it existed. Did not know how to use it. I still have some problems expressing it in my vocal tone, but I know it's an issue, so I try to avoid it unless I'm around friends who know extremely gullible. I grew up around people I trusted, family, friends, and adults with little animosity, neither my brother or I have much tolerance for people making extremely illogical and emotional decisions. Both of our parents were and are very good at making sure to talk things out with us and explain why rules are rules and why we can't do something. This has unfortunately led to some issues where people apply labels such as cold-hearted or Vulcan fashion. I literally did not understand why people would wear uncomfortable clothing to impress others. These days I have a good fashion sense. But damn it, all my fabrics are soft, at least I could go on. But really those are the big ones. Story 36. Not everyone has the same experience when it comes to being homeschooled. I'm sure it depends on a number of factors, such as the parents, teachers, the kid, and their social life. For me, I was the kid whose parents decided to pull me out of school after the 3rd grade when they received a revelation from God that he wanted them to homeschool me and the rest of my siblings. Since then, I had little to no social life up until my late teens when my father decided to go to seminary, and we moved to a town with other people lived in the middle of nowhere before. I'm not sure that I've ever really had culture shock, but I and most of my other siblings have dealt with social awkwardness and sometimes severe social anxiety. I really didn't have much structure and order in my life growing up, and it still shows sometimes. I managed to get my GED after I turned 18, which is more than I could say about some of my siblings. I spent a semester enrolled in a technical college that my parents suggested, but didn't continue because the course that I was taking was for a certificate and the credits wouldn't even transfer. And I already knew most of what they were telling me about graphic design since I had access to the internet and have been playing with Photoshop nearly every day since I was 14. Anyway, I digress. To summarize, I sometimes feel lost, like I'm floating through life haphazardly. I just turned 29 and am currently living with my grandparents since my 5-year relationship failed, and I am now jobless and carless. Story 37. Honestly, I'm 23, been through college, and still feel like I'm still not adjusted. Probably the biggest one was when I told a girl I didn't want coffee after a date. I was 19. My buddy explained that one to me, and we hooked up after the next day at it. Apparently, I probably will always feel like I never fit it. Oh well. I've been reading this book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and I think I'm okay with not fitting in.